Coming into 2022, Andor was the least anticipated of three shows, with the other two now having come out to an underwhelming reception. Andor is not a beloved legacy character, and in the eyes of many Star Wars fans, the period between 3 and 4 is oversaturated, but more so, other time periods, very undersaturated. To an extent, this is true, but nonetheless, Andor explores the themes and ideas surrounding the Rebellion era in a way that no other Star Wars project has come close to, even its daddy Rogue One. Andor analyses the nature of oppression masterfully through character, namely Cassian Andor and Cyril Khan. Together they deconstruct the binary symbiotic nature of oppression and hierarchy, its effect on both sides, and the role of both sides in perpetuating these effects. Andor, from the off, like in Rogue One, is shown to be a morally problematic character, killing two people. That's the first thing we see of him, not the stuff of typical heroes, but equally is contextualised through circumstance that through excellent acting and dialogue is implied to be typical for Andor and people like him. The corporate guards are shown to be extremely entitled and abusive of their power. We were here first, starting trouble with Andor, what are you looking at? Simply because they can. Andor, and again by extension people like Andor, don't belong there, and they make sure that's known. They start a scuffle, and he reacts. We are shown in no uncertain terms that Andor is a second-class citizen. The guards, through their position of privilege, have constructed a false sense of justice and entitlement, and a superiority complex. The system allows them to abuse their power, and tells them they can do what they want to people like Cassian, and they act accordingly. Luna's facial expressions further suggest Andor is more than used to this. It's very clear he's only breaking the rules and coming to a dodgy place for his sister's sake. He knows his place in society, how he's treated, and was trying to get in and out without trouble, implying trouble is likely/expected. The question is then, what could Andor have done differently? Whilst we know Andor isn't perfect, we are meant to still root for him. We can't root for someone who just kills people and easily couldn't. He could have, of course, simply just not killed them. It would have been better for him to give them his money, maybe take a punch to the gut and move on. He could have simply not gone somewhere he isn't supposed to be. But to what extent are these real choices? He went there to find his sister. There isn't much of a choice there. And of course, later as we learn, their initial separation is itself the result of oppression. This shows a key aspect of the nature of oppression. It forces you in situations to protect and get what matters that other people aren't, whilst unmarginalised people tend to be able to maintain relationships with loved ones and obtain reliable food, water, education, etc. through a legitimate means. Oppressed and marginalised people, due to poverty, othering and other mechanisms, often need to get dirty to get the basics. Then there's the guard's general disposition towards him, as well as the implied frequency of such unprovoked, unpleasant interactions. The natural reaction to this is anger. Not the best or most productive, of course, but nonetheless it's to be expected. And of course, anger at high enough levels for a long enough time should be expected to be expressed in some way, usually verbal or physical abuse. Then there's the fight itself. He wouldn't be there if not for previous oppression. They wouldn't be hounding him so much either. He could have just given them the money as stated, but he was rightfully angry and didn't want to put up with it. And even then he didn't try to kill them, he just wanted to take a stand. But violence runs the risk of injuries or death. The point is, it's all a game of odds. His separation from his sister, his general treatment by society, his treatment here, all of it leads to the point where Andor killing someone is more likely than someone who didn't face these challenges. But it doesn't stop there. The show consistently demonstrates the impact of the material conditions brought about by marginalisation and oppression after this point. They make a point to show us from the off that Ferrix isn't some utopian haven for people like Andor, but instead just a continuation of the oppression he experienced on Molana 1. They show this via the attack from the Corellian hound-like dogs on Bemo, as well as this shot cleverly harkening back to the Jawa's ambush of R2 in A New Hope, evoking the same sense of danger and being watched that we felt then. Ferrix has crime and scarcity and all the associated issues that stem from that. The odds are stacked against Andor here too. From Marva we find that Andor is known to hang out with the wrong crowd. Through Brasso, Nurchi and Pagla, we are shown how untrustworthy and slimy he is regarding favours and unpaid debt, leeching off goodwill to get by. We can also go back in time with the flashbacks, the murder of his tribe member and the destruction and exploitation of their land, and he destroys property in response. Even in episode 3 there's a line about spitting in their food. Justified or not, it's not nice or at least savoury behaviour. Andor isn't a particularly good person in actions, but he's shown time and again to be a good person at heart. Luna masterfully portrays the regret he has when killing the guard, for example. He sets aside money for his mum. He doesn't want to live this life, go down this path. But nonetheless, to a detached onlooker without understanding of his struggles and circumstances, he doesn't come across great, and that's where Cyril comes into things. Where Andor is presented as the quintessential disadvantaged oppressed person, Cyril is the quintessential privileged oppressor. This is masterfully highlighted throughout these episodes. His extremely high position at the top of the food chain has alienated him even from most of the other members of the oppressive hierarchy. He's constantly frustrated with his underlings, and even superiors when they don't take seriously enough the criminal acts and threats of communities like Ferrex. He is a true believer in the oppressor's superiority myth. Life is hard for everyone, being moral is hard, so naturally, if you're born into privilege, without introspection, you can very easily come to believe that the reason why you and your community doesn't kill or steal or fight very much is because you're simply fundamentally good people. Not to mention the fact that you set the rules as to what is considered murder and theft in the first place. Oppressed groups, by nature of being oppressed, do kill, steal, fight, and will continue to do so more often than oppressors. So it's not like they, or specifically in the case of the show, Andor, don't give plenty of reasons to hate them, or plenty of evidence to support this essentialist superiority complex, but nonetheless it is a psychological condition. On Andor's side, his oppression produces conditions fundamentally counterproductive to a stable family, access to shelter, warmth, food. However, just because Cyril, as the oppressor, comes out better in this dichotomy, doesn't mean he's better off in this power relationship and it existing than it not. His views are essentialist. He thinks they, people in Ferrex and people like Ferrex, are fundamentally bad, and we, people in the Force and people like people in the Force, are fundamentally good. This creates a level of hate for them and love for those around you and yourself that isn't hospitable to personal growth and introspection, and is actually quite unhealthy. It stifles intellectual potential. He's clearly a very intelligent guy, naturally extremely driven, and means well like Andor, a true believer in his cause, but his uncompromising commitment to the proper order derived from his warped worldview really damages his psyche. That level of hate, self-assuredness, self-seriousness, and frankly stuffiness isn't healthy. I mean, look at the guy, look how tightly wound he is when we first see him, how crazy he gets when someone finally takes it all as seriously as he does. And then we get the reckoning, and this face. The face of a man whose privilege has led him to believe that he had everything figured out. Getting this dismantled in a matter of minutes, his inadequacies laid bare for all to see. There's no doubt he will double down on his hate and his beliefs. People don't give up on myths, especially self-aggrandizing ones, so quickly or easily, but that's kind of the point. His position has made him stuck, his potential for emotional health and a higher meaning, as well as intelligence and the skill he needs to be the best person he can, stifled by the toxic position he was born into. A good way to look at Andor and Cyril is through the lens of Maslow's pyramid, which orders human need from the most fundamental to the least. Andor, as the quintessential oppressed person, struggles, as we've discussed, to meet even the most basic needs of food, shelter, warmth, safety. This alone makes life hard, and therefore I didn't even have to touch on the higher levels. But don't get mixed up about this. Without these solid foundations, the tiers above inevitably suffer. In order to meet his basic needs, he puts strain on relationships, using them to his end. There's no way he has any feeling of esteem and accomplishment with the way he uses his friends over and over, and it is made clear to us, again, through great acting on Luna's part, that he knows what he's doing and wants to be better and help people, e.g. when he's retrieving the Imperial device to sell. But safety comes first. Lastly, there's self-actualization. The way Andor demonstrates how Cassian's life is wasted due to an inability to self-actualize is actually my favourite part of Andor's characterization in the show. The end of episode 3, combined with the events of Rogue One, tell a story of tragedy of self-actualization, or more so the lack thereof. Andor was a young kid when we first see him. He should have all the opportunities in the world, but already at that young age, he has lost his parents, and has had to take over from them in looking after his sister, all with the looming threat and insecurity of his home being destroyed by the nearby mining operation. He then has to leave everything behind and go to Ferrex, which as we know is full of its own problems, which no doubt presented many more challenges to him in his remaining youth, and by the end of episode 3 he has to leave everything behind again. Throughout all this, his sense of self, his purpose, is an intense, undirected, raw anger at his circumstances and those who keep him there. The smashing of the ship, his speech to Luthen, it's all laced with pure hate. That and his care for his loved ones are what define his purpose and sense of self. But the solution to this is tragic. Andor will never live his best life. He's not getting that opportunity. Luthen offers him a chance to make a difference and have a purpose, but Andor's purpose is never internal. He's used as a means to an external end, to fight oppression so others can perhaps lead a full life where Andor couldn't. But Andor himself and all he cares about has to be left behind, represented by the smashing of his comlink. His story ends in Rogue One as part of a collective sacrifice for something far greater than any one person. His mum crying at the end of episode 3, alongside the comparison of his life being upended now with the last time, really pays off the character building they did with Andor. We completely get her sadness at the tragedy of his wasted potential, of how unfair it is, but then a rebel is born. And that's what the end of episode 3 shows, these two characters built up over the last 3 episodes, culminating in a perfectly executed sequence where the tragedy of oppression is synthesized by laying bare what they are missing from Maslow's pyramid. Andor will never reach his life's full potential. That path is now fully set. He'll be a tool of the rebellion to make sure that others can live a normal life where he couldn't. A bittersweet ending that expertly uses the time and focus a show can provide to expand upon Rogue One's focus on sacrifice and what it really means to be a rebel. Cyril has all the privilege in the world, but even he, as the oppressor, doesn't benefit from the institutions of oppression itself, which has closed his mind off from a fool that will work to deconstruct the nature of oppression as a lose-lose for all parties, and thus why it should be destroyed, and why it will be destroyed. I made this video simply because I felt I had to. The quality of this show, the care they put into it, the soul, it's all there, and most people who watched it seem to agree, but based on online interest, people aren't really watching it in the first place. I can't say exactly why that is. As stated at the start, it was the least anticipated of the 3 shows, it, Boba and Obi-Wan, and those 2 weren't received great, so that's probably part of it. But something that strikes me is Star Wars Theory's reaction to it.
Man, if you gotta take that long to explain that this dude killed 2 officers and he's trying to escape the planet, takes 3 episodes out of 12 and it takes 2 hours. I mean, dude, what the hell?
So he's essentially saying that it took 3 episodes to tell us that Andor killed 2 officers, 2 guards, and now he's trying to escape the planet and then he escapes. But I'd like to think my video shows that a lot more stuff happens. These 3 episodes exist to make us understand and care for Andor and Cyril, so the payoff at the end works and we're ready to follow their journeys throughout the rest of the show. I don't think you can really cut much and still get the same effect. Sure, in terms of purely moving the plot forward, Theory's statement is accurate, but I think the stuff that really matters with any story, Star Wars included, is its themes. They're where we derive meaning. Obi-Wan v Anakin, Vader v Luke both times. They're not good because they move the plot forward, they're good because of the underlying meaning behind the fights. And Andor does so much to explore quintessential Star Wars themes, the nature of oppression, what makes a rebel, and in such a clever way. So what's the difference? The first thing Theory says after his appraisal of the show, his first thought, is where's Obi-Wan, where's Vader, how can they come into play? This tracks with the general lack of interest in Andor compared to Boba Fett and Obi-Wan, and what episodes of shows seem to be the most popular. It makes sense, people care about established characters and places, but in my opinion, Andor is extremely well established in a meaningful way. The only difference is he's new. I'd like to think if Star Wars does something new, well, then we would all be able to get on board. But Andor is just about the most well done new thing we can get in my opinion. I don't think it can get better. Mandalorian Season 1 had new elements, but also relied on things we already cared about. Because of this I do worry for the future of Star Wars. And yeah, it's just Star Wars, but I do think this speaks to a wider issue of creative bankruptcy in Hollywood. When Lucasfilm, Disney see the reaction to Andor and other projects that are completely fresh compared to massive numbers for far less well-produced series, they're going to be discouraged from taking Andor-type risks again. And Andor-style risks are where icons are born. Thank you for watching.